Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we have a stack of sources that, well, let's just say it's going to make you question the very operating system of your own brain.
That's putting it mildly.
We are looking at the origins of a field called behavioral economics, but not through the usual lens of, stock markets or 401ks, at least not yet. We're starting with something much, much more visceral.
It is a fascinating and, I have to say, a pretty harrowing journey. We're essentially deconstructing this long-held illusion of the rational human.
Absolutely. And before we really get into the weeds, and trust me, it gets heavy, I want to throw a little scenario at you, and I want you and everyone listening to be really honest with yourself.
Okay, I'm already a little nervous.
You probably should be. All right, picture this. You've got a headache. Not just any headache, a real throbbing, behind-the-eyes migraine. So you go to the pharmacy.
Right there with you.
You see 2 bottles of aspirin on the shelf. Bottle A is the generic store brand. It costs, say, 1 cent per pill. Bottle B is a shiny, silver-embossed brand name bottle. It costs 50 cents per pill. 50 times more. Okay.
You're a smart consumer, so you turn them both over, you look at the back. The active ingredient is identical. 200 milligrams of acetylsalicylic acid. Same dosage, same molecule. Which one works better?
Logically, neither. They should be exactly the same. Chemistry is chemistry. Molecule doesn't really know its market price.
Exactly. That is the logical, rational Spock answer. But here's the kicker. And this comes directly from our source material. Specifically, a study they cite called the Velladone experiment.
I know this one. It's a classic.
It's unbelievable. So researchers gave people what they said was a new painkiller called Velladone. Half the group was told it cost 10 cents a pill. The other half was told it was a new wonder drug that cost $2.50.
A significant price difference.
Right. But here's the thing. Velladone was a placebo. It was just a vitamin C capsule.
So chemically speaking, it should have done absolutely nothing for anyone's pain.
Theoretically. But the results were staggering. Almost all the subjects who took the expensive $2.50 pill reported significant pain relief. They actually felt better. And the cheap one.
The people who took the cheap 10-cent pill, barely any effect. And honestly, this makes me angry. Are we really that shallow? Does my headache literally check the receipt before it decides to go away?
See, I think shallow is maybe the wrong word. It sort of implies a conscious choice, like we're being snobby about our medicine. What this research suggests is something far deeper, far more profound about how our brain actually constructs reality.
How so? What do you mean by constructs reality?
It's about expectation. It's about biology. When you see that high price tag, your brain, which has been trained for your entire life to associate expensive with quality or effective, it makes a prediction. It predicts relief.
Okay, I get the prediction part, but that's just a thought, isn't it?
That's the amazing part. It isn't just a thought. That prediction, that expectation, it triggers a real biological cascade. It can actually cause the release of endogenous opioids.
Wait, hold on a second. You're saying the price tag, the number on the bottle, actually causes my brain to release its own natural painkillers, like morphine.
Precisely. The placebo effect isn't just all in your head in the sense that it's fake or imagined. It is a real, physical, biological cascade triggered by a powerful expectation. So the expensive pill actually did work better, physically, because the brain made it work better.
Wow.
We aren't calculating machines, we're prediction machines. And our predictions can literally manipulate our own physiology.
That is wild. It effectively means that the market value becomes an active ingredient in the drug.
In a manner of speaking, yes. And this little anomaly, this aspirin mystery, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It points directly to the central thesis of all the material we're diving into today. We think we are logical, but we are consistently, systematically, and predictably irrational.
And that really brings us to the mission of this deep dive. We're here to explore the origin story of this entire field of research. And unlike most economic theories that, start in a dusty library or a university classroom, this one starts with a flash of light, with an explosion.
It's a really powerful story. It's about how a truly tragic accident forced one young man to view all of humanity from a completely, an alien perspective.
So we're talking about the foundational work of a researcher who completely revolutionized how we think about decision-making. But to understand his theories, you first have to understand his pain. So let's set the stage a bit. In the world of standard economics, the stuff you learn in Econ 101, how is a human being defined? What's the model?
In standard economics, and really in a lot of Western philosophy going back centuries, we rely on the model of Homo economicus.
The economic man. Sounds very grand.
It is. It's the Hamlet view of humanity, you could say. The source material actually quotes Shakespeare. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason. How infinite in faculty. That's the core assumption.
That we're rational agents.
Exactly. We're rational agents. We know what we want. We have perfect, or at least very good, access to information. We can weigh all the costs and all the benefits, and we'll always choose the path that maximizes our utility, our own self-interest.
So if I buy a car, it's because I've meticulously calculated the fuel efficiency versus the depreciation versus the insurance costs and decided this is the optimal choice for my transportation needs.
Right. And if you eat a donut, it's because you've rationally decided that the momentary pleasure outweighs the long-term caloric cost. You are always in control. You're basically a computer made of meat.
I love that image, a computer made of meat. But the sources we're looking at today, they basically say that model is, well, it's garbage.
It argues that Homo economicus is a complete fantasy. We don't behave like Hamlet, noble in reason. We behave a lot more like Homer Simpson. We're emotional, we're short-sighted, we're influenced by things that shouldn't matter. But, and this is the absolute crucial part, we aren't randomly irrational.
And that's such a key distinction, isn't it? If we were just random, you couldn't study us. You couldn't build a model.
Exactly. If our behavior was pure chaos, then the social sciences would be impossible. But the central argument here is that we are predictably irrational. We make the same kinds of mistakes in the same kinds of circumstances over and over and over again.
And because there's a pattern.
Because there's a pattern, we can study it, we can predict it. And maybe, just maybe, we can even design systems to help us overcome it.
And the man who started to uncover these patterns began his observations on a Friday afternoon in Israel. Let's go back to the origin story.
The author was about 18 years old, just a normal kid by all accounts. He was part of a youth movement, kind of like the Boy Scouts, but more geared towards preparing for mandatory military service.
And on this one particular Friday afternoon, his life, as he knew it, was completely shattered.
An explosion. A very specific kind of explosion, a magnesium flare.
I had to look this up after reading about it because the text just mentions it briefly, but magnesium flares are absolutely terrifying. They're used by the military to illuminate battlefields at night.
They burn incredibly brightly.
They don't just burn, they erupt. We are talking about temperatures that can melt steel. It's not a fire you can put out with water, it's a violent chemical reaction.
And one of these went off right next to him. The damage was catastrophic. 70% of his body was covered in third-degree burns.
70%. Let's just pause on that for a second. That is an injury that is almost incompatible with life.
It's right on the very edge of survivability. I mean, you're talking about the loss of the body's primary protective barrier, your skin. The risk of infection is massive. The fluid loss is off the charts. And the pain is beyond what most of us can possibly comprehend.
He spent the next 3 years in a hospital. 3 years, wrapped in bandages from head to toe. And the description of his existence during this time is just haunting. He wasn't just a patient. He effectively became an outcast from society.
This is what he later calls the alien perspective. It's so critical to understanding his work. When he was finally able to leave his hospital room, he had to wear the synthetic pressure suit 24 hours a day to keep the scar tissue from growing out of control. And on his face, he wore a mask.
He described himself as looking like a crooked version of Spider-Man.
Imagine being 18. You're supposed to be dating, going to parties, starting university, hiking with friends, figuring out who you are. Instead, you were encased in synthetic fabric, physically separated from the world by a layer of gauze and trauma. He couldn't participate in normal society. He could only watch it.
And this is where the social scientist was born. I think this is such a profound point in the narrative. Most of us, when we're in a system like going to work, buying coffee, driving in traffic, we don't really question the rules. We just flow with them.
We're the proverbial fish in water. We don't even notice the water exists.
Exactly. But he was ripped out of the water. He was sitting on the dry land, gasping, looking back at the fish tank. And he started asking these fundamental questions that everyone else just took for granted.
He would ask things like, why do people care so much about the brand of clothes they wear? Why did he fall in love with one particular girl, not another? Why was the hospital's daily routine clearly designed for the comfort and schedule of the doctors rather than the optimal recovery of the patients?
He specifically mentions the why of motivation. He loved rock climbing before the accident. Rock climbing is objectively difficult. It's dangerous. It shreds your fingers. It's painful. but he loved it.
Right.
Conversely, he hated studying history, which is safe and comfortable, and you do it in a chair. It made no sense from a purely rational, utility-maximizing perspective.
It forced him to realize that comfort and pleasure aren't the only drivers of human behavior. If we were purely rational, we'd avoid the pain of climbing cliffs or running marathons. But we actively seek out these challenges. Why? What need does that fulfill?
So he's lying there day after day, week after week, observing the world like an alien anthropologist jotting down notes on this bizarre species called humanity. But there was one part of his day that wasn't about passive observation. It was about pure, unadulterated suffering.
The bath.
Yeah, this section of the source material is just, it's hard to read. It's so visceral.
It is. But it's also the crucible of his entire theory. This is where it all began. Every day, burn patients have to go through this cleansing ritual. They're soaked in a disinfectant solution, often iodine-based, to kill bacteria and prevent infection.
Which stings, I imagine.
It stings on intact skin. On raw, burned flesh, he describes it as liquid fire. But the soaking, as terrible as it was, wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the bandages.
Because the bandages stick to the wound.
Exactly. The body is desperately trying to heal. It's oozing fluids, plasma. As that dries, the gauze literally fuses with the new raw tissue. To clean the wounds properly, those bandages have to come off every single day.
And this brings us to the core conflict of this whole deep dive. The conflict that, in a way, sparked the entire field of behavioral economics. It wasn't a debate about stock prices or interest rates. It was a debate about pain management.
It was a clash of two very different theories, two different, you could say, mathematical models of suffering.
In the red corner, we have the nurses.
And it's important to remember, these were experienced, kind, benevolent women. They were not sadists. They've been treating burn victims for decades. And their theory, their algorithm for pain, was high intensity, short duration.
The classic rip the Band-Aid off strategy that we've all heard a million times.
Right. And let's be fair and look at the logic there, because it does seem to make sense on the surface. They believed that if you pull the bandages off very fast, very vigorously, you cause a massive sharp spike in pain, but the duration of that pain is minimized.
It's over quickly.
Exactly. If you think about total suffering as an equation, let's say intensity multiplied by time, they were trying to drive that time variable as close to zero as possible.
Let's just get this over with. I think we've all said that to ourselves. If I have to do something awful, I'd rather it be 10 seconds of agony than 10 minutes of discomfort.
It feels intuitive. It feels merciful even.
But in the blue corner, we have the patient, our author. And he decidedly, violently disagreed with this approach.
He was the one in the tub. He was the one with the nerve endings on fire. And his theory, his proposed algorithm, was low intensity, long duration.
He pleaded with them. He begged them, take it easy, please. Just peel it slowly. I don't care if it takes an hour. Just don't rip it.
He wanted to trade time for intensity. He argued that if they pulled slowly and gently, the pain would still be there, yes, but it would be a manageable, steady hum. It wouldn't spike into that blinding, overwhelming agony. He could breathe through it. He could endure it.
But he lost that argument every single day.
Every day. He had no authority. He was just the patient. They were the experts. They told him, essentially, trust us. We know what we're doing. This is better for you.
And this is where we really have to dig into the psychology of the expert. Because the nurses weren't being cruel. They genuinely 100% believed they were right. Why were they so sure?
Well, it's a perfect storm of cognitive biases. The big one is confirmation bias, combined with the total lack of experimentation. Think about it. They had performed this ritual thousands of times, and every time the patient screamed, and then it was over.
And they saw it's over as success.
They interpreted that sequence of events, rip, scream, silence, as a successful procedure because it was finished quickly. They never once stopped to try the alternative. They never ran a control group.
It's unbelievable. They never thought to try it the slow way on one patient for a week and the fast way on another, and then just ask them which was better.
Never. They confused experience with expertise. And this is a trap we all fall into. Just because you've been doing something the same way for 20 years doesn't mean you're doing it optimally.
Yeah.
You might just be repeating the same mistake very efficiently for 20 years.
And there was also a specific physiological mechanism they were ignoring, right? The author talks about how he suspected the body processes these pain signals.
Yes, and this is absolutely crucial. The nurse's model assumes that pain is simply additive, that you just add up the seconds of screaming, and that's the total suffering score. But the author suspected from his own agonizing experience that pain just doesn't work that way.
He suspected the spike was the real problem.
The spike is everything. He believed that when you rip a bandage, the intensity is so high that it completely overwhelms the nervous system. It creates a state of shock and trauma.
It creates sensitization.
Exactly. Once you hit that 10 out of 10 white-hot agony, your body doesn't just snap back to zero the moment the pulling stops. You remain in a state of hyperarousal, of terror. The anticipation of the next rip becomes almost as bad as the rip itself.
Right, as a slow, steady pull allows for
What is it?
adaptation.
It's a concept called hedonic adaptation. Our neurons are primarily designed to detect change. If a stimulus is constant and steady, even if it's unpleasant, the neurons eventually start to fire less frantically. The brain basically says, okay, this is the new normal. I can dial down the alarm bells.
So by keeping the pain steady and low, he could have adapted to it.
He could have. But by ripping it, the nurses were preventing adaptation. They were resetting the trauma alarm every few seconds. So by desperately trying to minimize the time, they were actually maximizing the trauma.
That is just a tragic, tragic irony.
And for 3 years, he had no way to prove it. He was just a kid in a suit with a theory born of suffering.
So let's move the timeline forward. He eventually heals enough to leave the hospital, for the most part. He's still undergoing surgeries, but he's able to enter the next phase of his life. He enrolls at Tel Aviv University.
And this is the turning point. This is where the alien observer finally gets a toolkit. He starts learning the formal process of science.
And he takes this one class that changes everything. It's a class on the physiology of the brain, taught by Professor Hanan Frank, and this professor becomes the catalyst for everything that follows.
What struck the author so powerfully about Professor Frank was his attitude toward questions. Remember, in the hospital, when the author asked, "Why are you doing it this way?" the answer was always, because we're the experts. Because we say so.
The argument from authority.
Right. But Frank was completely different. The author would go to him after class with some wild theory, maybe about pain, maybe about motivation, maybe about love, and Frank wouldn't judge the theory as good or bad. He would just ask one question every time.
How can we test this?
How could you test it? It was a revelation. If you have an alternative theory, you must propose an empirical test. You have to design an experiment that can generate data to either prove or disprove your idea. You have to move from the world of, I feel like this is true, to the world of the data demonstrates this is true.
This is so empowering for him. He realizes he can actually find the answers to the questions that have been haunting him for years. But he hits a physical wall almost immediately.
He comes up with an experiment to test a theory about the development of epilepsy in rats. But you have to think about his physical condition. His hands are covered in severe scar tissue. His fingers are contracted. He has very, very limited manual dexterity.
And rat surgery is incredibly delicate work. You're talking about implanting tiny catheters into tiny little spinal columns.
It was physically impossible for him to do it alone. He needed a partner. He needed help.
Enter Ron Weisberg, the best friend we all wish we had.
The source material makes a point of noting that Ron was a pacifist, a vegetarian, and a devout animal lover.
Which is pretty much the worst possible resume for a rat surgeon.
It absolutely is. But that's what makes the story so beautiful. To help his friend, this gentle soul agreed to come to the lab on weekends and perform surgery on 50 rats. He violated his own ethical and emotional comfort zone because he saw how much this pursuit of knowledge meant to the author.
So for months, Ron is there, apparently looking away while doing injections, helping his friend chase this scientific truth. And they finally finish the experiment. They gather all the data, they crunch the numbers, and what did they find?
The theory was wrong.
It failed. After all that.
The hypothesis was completely incorrect. The connection the author was so sure existed, it just wasn't there in the data.
Oh, that must have been crushing. All that work, all that guilt for poor Ron. And it was all for nothing.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But the author describes that moment as one of pure, unadulterated joy.
Joy from a failed experiment.
Yes, because of the certainty. For the first time in his life, on a question that mattered to him, he wasn't just guessing. He wasn't relying on intuition or authority. He asked a question of nature. Nature answered with a firm no. And he knew the answer was no.
That is such a profound shift in mindset. It's the addiction of the scientific method. Even a negative result is a positive outcome because it's truth. It narrows the field of possibility.
Exactly. It proved to him that science could cut through the fog of opinion and bias. And once he had that proof, that confidence in the method,
Hmm.
he knew exactly what he had to test next.
The bandages.
He was ready to return to the scene of the crime.
So he couldn't just walk back into the burn unit and start experimenting on patients, obviously. He had to build a proxy. He had to simulate the experience of the bath in a controlled lab setting.
So he recruited his friends, fellow students, volunteers from around the university, and he became a bit of a mad scientist, really. He built all these devices to inflict mild temporary pain, safely, of course, but unpleasantly.
He used a heat probe, right? Placed on the arm.
A heat probe, yes.
Hmm.
He also used a kind of pressure vise on the finger. He used immersing a hand in painfully cold water. And fascinatingly, he even used the psychological pain of watching a stock portfolio lose money in a simulation.
I love that he included financial pain right from the start. It shows he was already thinking bigger than just physical burns. He was hunting for the universal rules of negative experiences.
Absolutely. So he sets up the two competing models in his lab. Model A is the nurse's method, a high-intensity stimulus, say high heat, for a short period of time. Model B is the patient's method, a lower intensity heat, but for a longer period of time. The total energy delivered, so to speak, was the same.
And he ran trial after trial. He collected subjective pain ratings from everyone, asking them, how much did that hurt? On a scale of, say, 0 to 100.
He collected the data, analyzed it, and the verdict was,
He was right.
the author was right, the nurses were wrong.
Vindicated by the data. That must have felt incredible.
Completely.
Yeah.
And the results were not ambiguous. They were consistent across the board, across all the different types of pain. People suffer significantly less if the negative experience is lower intensity and longer duration.
So ripping the Band-Aid off is, scientifically speaking, the wrong way to handle complex, repeated pain.
In cases of significant repeated trauma, yes. The data showed that we do not integrate pain over time like a simple calculus problem. Our memory and our experience of pain is disproportionately affected by the peak intensity,
The highest point of pain.
the highest point, and we are much less sensitive to the duration. This is a phenomenon he later termed duration neglect.
Wait, unpack that for me. Duration neglect.
It means that if I subject you to a painful noise for 30 seconds or for 60 seconds, your memory of how bad that experience was isn't actually that different. The doubling of the time doesn't double the remembered suffering. But if I double the intensity of that noise, even for just a second, you will remember it as horrific.
So by rushing to shorten the time, the nurses were spiking the one variable, the peak intensity, that actually matters most to our perception and memory of suffering.
Exactly. They were obsessively optimizing the variable, time that the brain cares about the least. And in doing so, they were maximizing the variable, intensity, that the brain screams about the loudest.
It's a tragedy of misplaced good intentions.
And it gets even worse. He also tested the trajectory of the pain.
The direction. What do you mean?
He tested whether it was better to have a pain that starts high and gets better, or a pain that starts low and gets worse, even if the total amount of pain is the same.
And what did he find? The nurses, I assume, would just do the worst part first to get it over with.
And that, too, was the wrong intuition. The data showed that people have a strong preference for an improving trend. If you end the experience on a less painful note, the memory of the entire event is significantly better. An experience that gets progressively worse feels much, much more agonizing because it adds anxiety and dread to the physical pain.
So literally every single intuition the experts had built up over decades of experience was wrong.
Every single one. Backwards.
So now comes the moment of truth. The confrontation. He's armed with charts and graphs. He has the p-values. He goes back to the burn unit at the hospital. He calls a meeting with the very doctors and nurses who had treated him.
Can you just imagine the tension in that room? The boy they remembered in the Spider-Man suit is back, now as a university researcher. And he's about to tell the department head that their core treatment protocol is flawed.
How did they take it? I would expect a lot of defensiveness. Who are you, a student, to tell us how to do our jobs?
And this is a really hopeful part of the story. The sources say that, surprisingly, they were receptive. And I think that really speaks to their underlying character. They weren't villains. They genuinely wanted to help their patients.
So they listened.
They listened. They looked at the charts. Yeah. And when they saw the data laid out so clearly, they were shocked, but they accepted it.
That's actually a huge relief to hear. It shows that good data can change minds, even deeply entrenched ones.
It can. They realized they had been, in the author's words, victims of their own inherent biases. They agreed to change the procedures in the burn unit based on his findings.
Huge victory. The end of the story, right?
Not quite. There's a twist. And this, for me, is the most profound and, frankly, chilling part of the entire deep dive.
Ah, yes. Nurse Eddie.
Eddie was his favorite nurse. The sources describe her as the one who was the kindest, the one who would hold his hand. She was the angel of the ward. After the big presentation, she pulls him aside privately.
And she agrees with him.
She agrees with the data. She says,
Yeah.
"You're right. We were wrong. We should change." But then she tells him the real reason why they did it the other way for all those years.
And this is where it shifts from physiology to deep psychology.
Completely. She says to him, "You have to understand the pain of the inflictor."
The pain of the inflictor. Wow, that phrase just gives me goosebumps.
It should. Eddie explained that when she has to rip bandages off a screaming child or a badly burnt soldier that she suffers too, it is emotionally agonizing for a healer to cause pain. Her overwhelming gut-level instinct is to make the screaming stop as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, my God, of course.
If she rips the bandage in 10 seconds, she only has to endure 10 seconds of that child screaming. If she peels it slowly for an hour, as he wanted, she has to sit there and listen to that agony for a full hour. Her own stress, her own empathy-driven pain goes through the roof.
So the rip-it-off method, it wasn't actually optimized for the patient's well-being at all. It was subconsciously optimized for the nurse's emotional survival.
Exactly. And here is the absolute crucial part. Eddie and the other nurses didn't know they were doing that. They weren't consciously thinking, "I'm going to hurt this patient more to save myself from feeling bad."
No, of course not. That would be monstrous.
No, that would be sociopathic. Instead, their brains, and the collective brain of the nursing staff culture, constructed a beautiful, noble rationalization. They convinced themselves and each other that it's better for the patient if we do it fast.
They created a noble lie to cover up a selfish or at least self-protective need.
It was a self-protective need, and this is a perfect example of what psychologists call post hoc rationalization. We have a deep emotional impulse, in this case, to make the screaming stop. We act on it, and then our conscious, logical brain swoops in afterward and invents a perfectly plausible reason why that action was actually the smart, virtuous, and correct thing to do all along.
That's terrifyingly human, isn't it?
It is. It reveals that our intuition is often just a clever cloak for our own comfort. The nurses thought their expertise was guiding them to optimize the patient's outcome, but they were actually, subconsciously, optimizing for their own distress tolerance.
And neither side, not the patient, not the nurse, could see what was really happening until the cold, hard data stripped it all bare.
And this was the moment. This was the flash of insight where the author realized that his research wasn't just about burns and bandages. It was about everything.
Because if these people, highly trained, deeply caring professionals, can be so profoundly wrong about the core function of their own job,
Then who else is wrong about their job, about their life?
are financial advisors wrong about how we perceive risk?
Yeah.
Are politicians wrong about what policies actually make people happy? Are parents wrong about the best way to discipline their children?
Are we wrong about our own motivations,
Yeah.
our own happiness, our own decisions?
And this realization basically launches the entire field we now call behavioral economics. Can you define that for us specifically in contrast to that Hamlet Homo economicus model we talked about at the beginning?
Sure. Standard economics, as we said, assumes we are rational calculators. Behavioral economics starts with the assumption that we are flawed, emotional thinkers who are constantly and powerfully influenced by context, by our environment, and by these hidden cognitive biases. It's the marriage of psychology and economics.
It says we don't make decisions in a sterile, logical vacuum. We make them under the influence of all these invisible forces, like the price of an aspirin or the pain of an inflictor.
Exactly. Let's take the dieting example we teased in the intro. Standard economics says, I value my long-term health more than the fleeting pleasure of this donut. Therefore, I will not eat the donut. Simple calculation.
Behavioral economics says, the donut is right there in front of me. It smells like vanilla and cinnamon. My blood sugar is a little low, my colleague is eating one, and my emotional short-term brain is screaming, eat it now, survival.
And just like the nurses, we often rip the bandage off. We eat the donut to satisfy the immediate, intense craving. That's the nurse stopping the screaming. Even though we know, intellectually, that the slow, steady path of healthy eating is better for the long-term outcome.
We're optimizing for the immediate relief of desire rather than the long-term utility of health.
We are what they call present biased. We value the now disproportionately more than the later. It's a relic of our evolutionary past, but it wreaks havoc in the modern world of credit cards and fast food.
What about that other example you mentioned from the source, the Ten Commandments experiment? How does that fit in?
That's another classic experiment by the same author, done much later in his career. He gave university students a math test where they had an easy opportunity to cheat and win money. They would self-report their scores.
And I'm guessing most people cheated.
What's fascinating is that most people cheated just a little bit. They'd claim they solved one or two more problems than they actually did, just enough to get a few extra dollars, but not so much that they had to update their self-image to, I am a bad person.
I'm not a cheater. I just, I made an honest mistake in my favor.
Exactly. But then he ran a variation. With a new group, right before the test, he asked them to try and write down as many of the 10 Commandments as they could remember.
Even if they weren't religious.
It didn't matter. Most couldn't remember all 10. Just the simple act of trying to recall a moral code was the key.
And the result?
The cheating vanished. To zero. It disappeared completely.
Wow. Just from a 5-minute writing exercise. Why?
Because he changed the context. He primed their brains. He brought their moral self to the front of their minds right before the moment of temptation. Normally, we operate on this sort of self-interested autopilot, and our autopilot is a little bit shady. But if you force the brain to think about ethics and morality, the decision-making process itself changes.
Again, it shows we aren't fixed computers running a single program. We're fluid. A computer wouldn't calculate a math problem differently if you made it recite the 10 Commandments first. But a human brain absolutely does.
We are context-dependent machines. The price of the aspirin changes the pain. The recall of a moral code changes our honesty. The method of removing a bandage changes the trauma.
It's all connected. It's all about these hidden influences shaping our choices from behind the scenes.
And that really brings us back full circle to that Shakespeare quote. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god.
It's a beautiful sentiment. And humans are clearly capable of angelic, godlike things. We build cathedrals, we write symphonies, we cure diseases. But when it comes to the daily grind of making decisions,
We are less angel and a lot more nurse Eddie.
we're trying to avoid our own discomfort. We're trying to seek immediate relief. And we are telling ourselves elaborate, convincing stories to justify it all. So we've journeyed from a magnesium flare in Israel to the fundamental flaws of the human mind. Let's try to package this for everyone listening. What is the big final takeaway from this deep dive?
I think if you boil it all down, the core lesson is about the virtue of doubt.
Doubt, not certainty.
Constructive doubt. The nurses failed their patients not because they were bad people, but because they never doubted their own intuition. They assumed that because they felt sure, they were right. Their confidence was their biggest blind spot.
So the takeaway is that we need to be more skeptical of our own gut feelings.
Especially when those feelings involve a desire to just get it over with or do what feels natural. What feels natural is often just what's easiest for us in the short term, not what's most effective.
We need to be more like that 18-year-old scientist in the Spider-Man suit. We need to stop and ask, okay, I believe this is the right way to manage my finances or handle this argument with my partner or approach this project at work. But how do I know I'm right?
What's the counterfactual? What if I tried the opposite for a week? What data can I gather? It's a call for more experimentation in our own lives. Don't just run the default script that your brain offers up. Question it.
And it's also a call for empathy, isn't it? But a very specific kind of empathy.
That's a great point. The nurses thought they had empathy, but what they really had was projection. They were projecting their own need for relief onto the patient. Real empathy requires the difficult intellectual step of understanding that the other person's internal experience might be totally different from your own.
The patient's experience of pain is not the same as the nurse's experience of inflicting it.
And recognizing that difference is everything.
That is a very powerful distinction. Before we sign off, I know you wanted to leave our listeners with a final thought experiment.
I do. A challenge, really.
Let's hear it.
I want you, everyone listening, to take a minute and identify the painful bandages in your own life right now.
We all have them.
We all do. Maybe it's a difficult conversation you've been avoiding with your spouse or your boss. Maybe it's a project at work that you know is failing and needs to be shut down. Maybe it's a bad habit you know you need to break.
And the natural instinct is to rip it off. Just have the screaming fight, fire the employee in a quick email, go cold turkey on the bad habit, get it over with.
Exactly. That's the Nurse Eddie solution. But I want you to ask yourself, are you rushing that process because it will truly yield the best long-term outcome? Or are you rushing it because you cannot stand the emotional discomfort of the process itself?
Are you optimizing for the health of the relationship, the company, your own body?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you optimizing to reduce your own anxiety?
Because sometimes the slow pull, the patient, difficult day-by-day work of peeling that bandage back carefully is the only way to heal the wound without leaving a permanent scar.
Optimization isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about endurance.
That's it, exactly.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to go rethink how I handle pretty much everything in my life.
As we all should.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you in the next one.